910 east over. Ready, depart. Hinkle off main 2, looking for light.
An eastbound manifest is still early in its trip, having left Portland this morning. It's headed to North Platte, Nebraska, but before it can leave Oregon, it must contend with one of its biggest obstacles, the Blue Mountains, which are some 40 miles distant still. This historic region is rich with stories of pioneers, explorers, and migrants who were all faced with this geographic challenge. But from the Oregon Trail to today, the struggle is best encapsulated by Union Pacific's effort to lift heavy trains over this major obstacle, which it's been doing on the overland route for the last 143 years. Toward the end of the Ice Age, a tremendous flood carved through the Columbia lava plateau, forming the Columbia River Gorge. Less known is the small gorge between Hinkle and Pendleton, which was carved at the same time. Today, the 89-mile-long Umatilla River runs through it and blazed most of the trail for track layers building the line, as the route will follow this waterway all the way to Meacham. Quaint steam engines and wooden cattle cars have been displaced by technology, as we observe an 8,470-foot Portland-bound Z-train from Chicago. Pulling with over 17,000 horsepower on the head end by about 48 equivalent-powered axles, the train passes at 50 miles per hour. The Umatilla River waters have chosen a path more explorative than Union Pacific cared to follow, and these silver through truss bridges are ubiquitous for the route, as the right-of-way crosses the meandering river many times. This high-priority train, just like its eastbound counterpart, the ZBRG2, are on a 2.5-day schedule between Global 2 in Chicago and Brooklyn Yard in Portland. I've split this feature into a 3-part trilogy, covering Hinkle to RIETH, then in Part 2 we'll feature the west slope of the Blues, and in Part 3 we'll finish up with the east slope to La Grande. I drew a map showing only topography, tracks, and interstates for this project to get a visual idea about how the sidings and double main track appear. As we follow the line, we'll scout our locations on the map. From Hinkle to La Grande, the La Grande Sub and Crew District is about 105 miles, short by comparison to most UP mainline subdivisions. As we move east, the tracks cross the Umatilla River several times and pass through the only tunnel on the route, approaching Barnhart. Just past the tunnel, we're at the middle of 3 bridges within the span of a mile. Today, DPUs, or distributed power units, are found on almost every train. The Blues were an early-on place to find radio-operated slave unit technology, replacing the manned helpers, unlike, for instance, the Cascade sub, which has used manned helpers up until recently. The gorge was a peaceful stage as the sun set behind the basalt cliffs. I moved west to catch a train in the twilight, but noted the location to return come morning. Having just exited the subdivision's one and only tunnel, a Pocatello-bound train has 9 total locomotives to help lift its 2-mile-long load over the steep grades ahead. A steely-eyed engineer sent his greetings when he spotted me on the hill. When first built, the line was called the Oregon Rail and Navigation, and its fortunes were intertwined with the Northern Pacific under a holding company formed and operated by Henry Villard. The interests of these companies were often at odds, and NP hindered the success of the ORNN as it attempted to move east to meet the advancing Union Pacific-Oregon short line. Nevertheless, in 1884, the rails did meet in Huntington, completing a route from Portland to the East Coast. It wasn't until Oregon Rail and Navigation was able to divorce itself from NP and give the Oregon Short Line control in 1886 that the route took on the look we see today, with Union Pacific in control. And finally, Portland had a friendly railroad with a direct link east. Furthermore, UP could then strike out into NP territory with competing lines into the Palouse. The sun is back, and so am I, east of Nolan, awaiting the arrival of an MP dog, or in other words, a manifest Portland to Ogden, Utah freight. Until reaching the summit at Camella, the grade steadily climbs, but until it reaches 1% at Pendleton, it holds at a fairly easy 0.6% from Nolan east through the gorge. Easy as the grade may be, these locomotives still work hard to keep 10,000 plus tons rolling at 50 miles per hour. The beautiful Umatilla River even rolls under steel-through truss road bridges as I re-enter RIETH Road and head toward Pendleton. RIETH, just west of Pendleton, is the longest siding on the sub at 13,671 feet, not to be confused with the several double main track locations we will see, which are longer. The west control point, N211, serves not only RIETH siding, but the Pilot Rock industrial lead. Hopefully we haven't seen the last train to Pilot Rock, which ran in 2020. There remains an active lumber mill at the end of the line, but track repairs would be required before that. Although the 14.3-mile-long branch currently sits dormant, the timetable instructions still list the track speeds at 15 mph, which includes the speed of the turnout here at N211. With clear signals down the main, this crew need not concern themselves with this as they highball to Hinkle, where the train will be broken up. Since this train's headed to Hinkle Yard, I think I will too, and see how things look since my last trip there 16 years ago. Jumping to spring, we're passing under an auto train headed for Washington, as I arrived right after a heavy rain, and I have found much appearing the same as the last time I was here, with the remote 6-axle yard switchers working the hump. Or on the surface, so it seemed. This train is getting classified into the bowl, but not how you might expect. More on that in a minute. First, let's go on a quick yard tour, viewing a track schematic to help us understand how the yard works. This is a modern automated hump yard built in 1976 with a 40-track bowl for classification. Also, UP's premier Northwest locomotive shops are here. Viewed from near the hump tower, several CPKC locomotives are moving to the locomotive servicing facility. Much of the reason for the existence of this yard is the connection here from the Eastport line, which brings many Canadian locomotives down an interchange. Here the units sit at rest until they've been checked, fueled, and filled with sand for their next assignments. In track 531, we see the Canadian Pacific engines cooling their wheels. Near the Y, next to Locomotive Lane, something I hadn't noticed before was this turntable, looking very functional, though I couldn't say whether or not it actually gets used. Moving down track 534, a remote local switch job is making its way perhaps toward the Umatilla branch to switch customers. Behind the local is an eastbound I train sitting on main track 2. Most trains crew change on the main and take fuel if need be, since there is a fueling facility for both Main 1 and Main 2. After the Portland crew hands the train over to a La Grande crew, they'll head to the hotel for their federally mandated 10 hours of undisturbed rest until they get called for the train home. The 1951 McNary Dam project relocated the main line, and UP made Hinkle the center for car switching at that time. RIETH Yard in Pendleton had been the operational hub until then, and about 25 years later, Hinkle got a major upgrade again with the construction of this facility. A brace of CPKC power is moving to couple to their cars in the departure yard. Within an hour, they will be heading in MHKET toward Eastport, Idaho, onto the Eyre subdivision. The outbound crew will be working from here to Spokane, and from there, the train will be manned by a Spokane sub-crew to Eastport, Idaho on the Canada border. From the hump, a beautiful view of the region stretches out all around. The bright green fields will be trading their coats for golden yellow and burnt umber in a couple of months. Under the hump, track 107 connects the arrival yard and diesel house with the one spot and departure tracks. And over the hump, cars are pushed to allow gravity to do the heavy lifting. The tried and true practice by Class 1 railroads for top operating efficiency. Except here, our hump has been downgraded, having the retarders removed from service. So, it's a glorified flat switching yard with only the last bit of the hump used to let cars roll, just much slower than when trains were once classified here with the hump fully operational. It was in 2019 many were shocked to hear the news that the hump would be deactivated, and it was at that time several yards system-wide would experience layoffs and downgrading. I do not envy the remote operator who must give himself a pin to roll the cars while they are draped over the steep hump. Since the retarders have been removed from service, cars rolled from the top would have too much speed entering the bowl. Part of the function of a hump as intended is to pull the pin at the top, where the slack is naturally in, rather than toward the bottom, where the slack is rolled out. But I'm only a simple conductor, and as we railroaders often say, we just don't see the big picture. At least we still see the bowl in use, with cars rolling in instead of collecting weeds, as has been the plight of so many classification yards, not the least of which would be the empty, weed-filled bowl of my home terminal yard in Eugene. The GRANDE Sub begins at control point E185. About 4 miles east of that, we are in Stanfield, where double main track begins at control point E189. This is also where the yard lead for Hinkle starts for westbound trains. Rolling up Main 2 is the OT4WV, an empty soda ash unit train coming to a stop. Their signal is red, so we can expect there's a westbound close by.
Wheeler coming over. Oh, okay, never mind. You just need an hour to get in the clear, is that all? Yeah, and then one get ready to take off out of Hinkle after this other one gets in. That'll work, yeah. If we can be clear in about an hour, that'd be great.
As we hear the dispatcher talking with a maintenance of way employee, we get our answer. Sometimes trains will stop, not to meet a train, but to wait for a maintenance of way worker to clear his track and time limits. The section of track between signals and CTC with a dispatcher-controlled switch is called the OS, which stands for on-sheet, an old telegrapher term carried over from the days of train sheets, held by dispatchers which were marked once they hit the OS and were active on his board. This OS is extra long, with a higher speed turnout as the main line splits from 1 to 2. Speed through this switch is 40 miles per hour. Also within this OS is another switch, through which the dispatcher can line a train into the yard. Between Stanfield and Pendleton, the tracks take the low course following the Umatilla River, reaching Echo almost immediately. With its 6,363-foot siding, not many trains today fit here between switches, but the second siding at Nolan is friendlier for today's longer freights. Nolan is a pastoral, scenic spot away from the bustle of Hinkle or the travelers on I-84. Since the interstate was built, this little valley has been all but forgotten, except for the regular passage of behemoth freights, which are seen only by the farmers and cattle that enjoy their fertile ranches dotting the right-of-way. Currently, an MPCHK with 100 cars exactly is taking the 8,478-foot-long siding at Nolan. Over the course of 90 minutes, this spring evening, I would see two meets here, starting with a heavy eastbound I train holding the main. Slow orders have trains down from their usual 45 to 50 miles per hour through here. The GRANDE Sub sees more than 20 trains daily. Usually between 22 and 26 scheduled trains will roll through every 24 hours. Aside from 4 separate locations with double main track, 14 controlled sidings help provide regular meet locations, and all of those are over a mile in length. Afterward, I moved down to the crossing by control point N199 for this stunning sunset behind the grain elevator. Looking east, the signals had a diverging approach lit up, so I lingered, enjoying the company of the curious cattle and the quiet atmosphere.
And 201, out.
First to arrive, a stack train holds the main, calling the approach. At control point N201.
194.9, no defects. Total axle 466. Train speed 24. MPH temperature 69 degrees. Detector out.
UP7308 over. Go ahead, over.
We hit the detector at 194.9 and gave us an extra car. Supposed to have a 462 axles and gave us 466 over.
Give up PCC, call that 985, I'll help you out.
Okay, giving no PC a call.
Start show.
An increasing issue is trains with extra cars not reflected by the paperwork. Axle counts help alert the crew to these conditions. The scanner will hopefully relay to Omaha the ID of mysterious riders.
Operation UP7308. I'm actually showing you with 3 ads. 2 of them don't have reader tags, so I can't even tell you what the car numbers are, and the BC hasn't updated to reflect that. How many cars are you actually showing over?
On our paperwork, we should have 111 cars, but I guess we're having a couple extra, you say?
Yeah, I'm showing you with 114 by the reader, but like I said, 2 of them Must have bad tags on them. I can't get car numbers on them. Yeah, the other two that the reader's catching are shown as line 26 and line 33. But again, I can't see what the numbers are.
Okay, thanks for letting us know, over.
Yeah, not a problem. The operation.
We deal with this almost daily on my subdivision as well. Usually, the RFID chip can be scanned and provide car initials, car type, lading, and weight and length information, all important information for the crew and dispatcher to know. Well, friends, that'll conclude part one. I hope you'll visit Pacifoc Rail Productions again soon as we continue following the Oregon Rail into the blues on the Grande Sub.